Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Sedgemoor District Council's Community Scrutiny Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Hilary Bruce, Chair of the committee. I'm going to hand over now to the committee manager, Steve Taylor. I think he's got a bit of housekeeping to do.
Good afternoon. Hopefully those present will be able to see and hear the meeting. However, in the event of a technical failure, the chairman will adjourn the meeting and set a new time to reinstate it. Please note the meeting is being recorded, and a copy of that recording will be available on the Council's committee web pages within the next few days. All members of the committee should have their camera on, but should remain muted until invited to speak. If you wish to attract the chairman's attention, please, where possible, make use of the instant messaging function. And the format of the meeting will be as per the agenda published. Over to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so I'd like to ask first the committee members to confirm, to present themselves and confirm they can see and hear everything, please. I would start with, so Councillor Scott, I know is absent today. Alexia Bartlett, Councillor Bartlett. She did message to say that she might be delayed, so she may well arrive a little bit after the start of the meeting. Councillor Betty.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Councillor Angie Betty of the King's R Ward, and I can see and hear everything.
Thank you. Councillor Clayton.
Hi, good afternoon. Councillor Peter Clayton, Burnham North. I can see everything and hear everything, apart from I've got a serious eye infection, so I can barely see you all. But good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Crowe.
Councillor Barry Crowe, Puritan and Woodavington, and I can see and hear everything.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Oh yeah, Councillor Gibson, Eastover, Bridgewater. I can see and hear the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Godwin Pearson.
Good afternoon, Chair. Graham Godwin Pearson here from Axvale Ward. I can see and hear everything.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Councillor Harvey has sent apologies, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Rodriguez.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you can now. Thank you.
Cool. Yep, I'm here. I can see and hear everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Wong.
Councillor Wong sends his apologies, Chairman.
Right, lovely. Thank you. We have some officers with us today. Steve, could you help me by asking the officers to present themselves?
Yes, certainly. We have Dave Coles.
Hello.
David,
Yes, I confirm I can hear and see everyone.
And we can probably best introduce the other officers as and when they come up for their item, Chairman.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. Okay, and I think at that point we can start the meeting with item 1. So I'll get the documents up just a moment. So apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman. It's Councillor Harvey, Councillor Wong and Councillor Scott.
Lovely, thank you. Item number 2 is to agree the minutes of the meeting held on Monday the 15th of March 2021 as a correct record. Are all committee members in agreement with that? Okay, I can't see Councillor Crowe. Okay, agreeing. Okay, Steve, I think we can take those as...
Yes, I agree.
Thank you, Chairman. And also Councillor Bartlett has now joined the meeting, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Bartlett, would you like to present yourself and confirm you can see and hear, please?
Hello everybody, sorry I'm a few minutes late. Alexia Bartlett, Dunware Ward. I confirm that I can see and hear you all live and clear.
Thank you. So going on to item 3, urgent business. I don't think there is any urgent business to deal with today.
That's right, Chairman. No business.
Thank you. Item 4, public speaking time.
No
Steve?
members of the public have registered to speak, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you. And are there any, item 5, are there any declarations of interests from committee members? No, I take that as a no then, the silence. Okay, so moving on to item 6 is the balloon and sky lanterns policy. We have Officer Dave Coles with us today, who will be presenting this. So I'll hand over to Dave Coles first on this item. Thank you.
Oh, yes. So I have attached to the meeting agenda a copy of the balloon and lantern policy. So if I just run through the policy with you, I'll give you I share my screen with you so you can actually see the document, and I'll give you a bit of background information and a little bit of information as to how it's been reviewed, I suppose. So in terms of background information, the balloon and sky lantern policy was introduced or was produced by Adrian Gardner, the group manager for environment and regulation, a couple of years ago, and I think he produced it because it crosses over, I suppose, a couple of areas of his responsibility. I suppose to a certain extent environmental health, but also clean surroundings in terms of littering and cleaning up these lanterns and so forth that are released and balloons. So I went through the policy after the meeting in I think it was February actually. I went through it and I haven't changed anything in the policy. I read it. I did have a brief discussion with Adrian about it, and it was felt that the policy covered everything that needs to be covered at the present time. I've also checked things like complaints that we've received. So we received complaints, have we received complaints about people releasing lanterns and balloons and sort of waste and so forth associated with that. I checked environmental health. We haven't had any specific complaints about it. And I checked with clean surroundings because they may get involved if there's lots of these things deposited on the ground. They haven't had any specific complaints about it. So with that in mind, I haven't changed the policy. If it come back that we'd had, lots of complaints about specific types of events or where these things are occurring, then maybe we could have tailored a bit, we could have amended the policy to reflect that. But I haven't, like I say, we haven't had, huge amounts of complaints about it. So in terms of the policy, I don't know whether anyone was involved when it was written previously, but the policy basically covers, it's got a bit of background information just to say how or why the policy's been put in place, to do with things to do with the Marine Conservation Society, and obviously concern for the RSPCA and the Farmers Union about the effects that these types of lanterns and balloon releases can have on wildlife, things like livestock eating the components of them when they fall out the sky. So there's a short introduction in there. And the objective of the policy is to basically discourage people from using these types of lanterns and balloon releases, and where we've got our own land, to try to reduce or to basically prohibit people from releasing them from our land. And there is sections in the policy about littering. So it may be that if people do release these things and they cause littering, then there may be action that, for example, Clean Surroundings could take under littering, sort of, I suppose, littering stroke fly tipping legislation to take action against those who've done it if they can identify who they are. In terms of being able to stop people from releasing these things, the policy is not, we haven't got the powers to be able to do that. So other than say on our own land, so for example, if someone came to us and said, we'd like to release some lanterns from, say, Apex Park, or a piece of land that's under our management, then we could say, no, you can't do that because we've got control over that land. But in terms of private events and so forth, there's no specific enforcement powers for us to be able to say you can't do that. The powers that we would rely on, I suppose, is trying to deal with it after people have done it, in terms, you know, by dealing with the littering issue and the waste that's come out of the result of them releasing these lanterns. So really, the policy is advice to basically try and stop people from doing it, and where people do it on our land or try to do it on our land, requiring them not to be able to do that. So yeah, so there was no, in terms of the policies review, there wasn't anything that I changed from the previous one, because, like I say, we haven't had a sort of a massive problem or that we're aware of this occurring since the original policy has been put in place.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Can I just ask first committee members if you can, if you have any technical questions for Dave on the report before we start to debate the policy, whether we approve it or not, whether we could start with the technical questions to Dave. Can't actually see.
Councillor Bartlett has raised her hand, and Councillor Gibson.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Oh, hello. I'm not sure whether or not this is a technical question, but Dave, thank you for that. I'm just picking up on the idea of, or the policy of littering. You said that you could try and, you know, enforce some kind of powers there. But if somebody lets off some Chinese lanterns or sky lanterns rather, if they let them off on private land and they drift onto council land and cause littering, how can you actually trace the owners of that? This is something which worries me, because it seems to be something which is very difficult to enforce, or might be.
Yeah, you're right there. That's the main crux of the problem we have, is that there is no, like I said, there's no primary legislation to prohibit people from releasing them. The only thing that we can try to do, and I say try to, is if, you know, if someone released loads of these things and they landed all, you know, in a public area, for example, and we could trace them, you know, they were, you know, sounds like some of these, say for example, balloon release things, they have, you know, sometimes they used to do them for charity, didn't they? They'd have like little labels on them to say in aid of, you know, whichever charity or whatever cause they were doing it for. Potentially, if you know, hundreds of these things were littering the ground, and there was a way of tracing who'd released them, then potentially you could take some sort of enforcement action. But like you say, it is quite difficult to be able to do that unless you can prove who's released them and there's evidence to that effect. So in effect, policy is more to, I suppose it's designed to discourage people, and where we own the land, you know, we can say sorry. You know, if someone comes and says, I'm having a this type of event on your land, and part of that I want to release, you know, sky lanterns or balloons, etc., then we can say no because we own the land. But private land, like you say, the only thing we may be able to rely on is if we could identify who've done it, and then, you know, and then deal with it under littering legislation. So it's really using, so I suppose, as there's no primary legislation for lantern and balloon releases, it's relying on, let's say, a piece of almost secondary legislation to try and deal with it if people do it and it causes a significant problem.
Councillor Bruce, can I just come back there just for a second? There's also one issue, I think I'm probably going into the debate rather than technical, so apologies if I'm kind of veering off here. I'm also worried about sky lanterns and highways. I don't know if it's possible for them to fly down into kind of traffic areas, roads. I mean, there could be a serious kind of implication for road safety as well. I don't know if that, I mean, am I right in thinking that?
I mean, ultimately, they could fly, you know, they could land anywhere, really. I mean, you can, once you release them, depending on where the wind's blowing and the, you know, the direction of travel, yeah, they could land on railway lines. They could land on, they could land on top of someone's thatched cottage. These are the issues I think that have caused, that caused concern over the years of these releases. And similarly, they could fall on, onto the highway. Presumably, if they fell onto the highway and caused a serious accident, that would be a matter for the highways or the police guys to look at. But again, it's back to this legislation of, whilst there's possibly legislation for dealing with the aftermath. So, for example, if someone lets them off and they landed in on a petrol station and it exploded, I mean, that's quite an extreme scenario, which is probably unlikely to happen. But if it did, then there would, that it wouldn't be the fact that someone released them. It would be what the secondary legislation for causing it. So it's again like the littering and so forth. So I don't think there's anything else we could put in there in terms of our policy, because things like highways and so forth and things like that is more to do with police. I mean, we could reference it in there as an example and say, they could potentially, landing in inappropriate areas cause damage and so forth. So we could add a paragraph in to that effect, but not like I said, there's no specific power for us to be able to prevent the release. It's more, like I say, clearing up the whatever happens afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Is that okay, Councillor Butler? Happy with that? Okay.
And there's Councillor Godwin Pearson, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Godwin Pearson.
Hi. Thank you, Dave, for that detailed analysis. I've sort of got three little points to make. One of them is, this is an issue that unites urban environmentalists and farming communities. And it's something that I hear about a fair amount. And we're talking about two separate issues really here. The lanterns are a danger to cattle, and the pollution balloons are quite likely to blow out to sea, especially where we are. And then you've got a lot of plastic then in the oceans, which of course we're trying to avoid. I don't think they particularly land on roads, Councillor Bartlett, because they tend to settle in areas where there isn't much air turbulence. So they settle in urban communities, but also on fields and things. But I think they tend to sort of avoid roads, especially when they're busy, if you see what I mean. I see the NFU has a campaign to lobby the government to ban them entirely, but both balloons and both balloon releases and sky lanterns. And I wonder if Sedgemoor has signed up to that campaign. You might know, Dave, if you've done that. And 175 councils have so far. I don't know if we have.
No, I'm not aware that we have done that. So that's something that maybe can come out of this meeting as a sort of recommendation.
Could be, yeah. Is it? They all have to come from somewhere, and I wonder, given that we've got limited powers, are we able to firstly write to wedding venues that we know about and supermarkets and other places that sell these things and remind these end users and retailers of the dangers, maybe, as a local authority? Is it within our power to do that and to remind them of the implications of the pollution and the livestock damage, the threat of fires, and the enforcement? Is it in our power to do that? And secondly, will we have any additional powers as a unitary to do any more, or is it really just down to central government to make a decision? So sorry for that multifaceted question.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think the issue with the venues and so forth. I mean, we can write to people giving advice. Obviously, we'd have to say it's not an enforcement issue as such. So we could write to various people. I mean, what I think we may be able to do, and I'd have to speak to my colleagues in licensing, would maybe whether there's anything that can be included as a line in anything they issue for licensed events or temporary event notices, not as necessarily a condition, but as a general advice to say, because of the effects of these, it's discouraged that you release them. So that could be a way around it. That's something I'd need to speak to my colleagues in licensing about, as to whether whether they can include that, because some of their forms and things that they license pro formas that they issue are all sort of standard sort of legal format. But that could be an option, because from what you're saying, this is where, you know, it is things like weddings and sort of these sort of events where people may be releasing them. So whether an advice note can be just be inserted into anything that goes out with these. But I can speak to one of my colleagues in licensing about that, as to whether we can do that. The other question about unitary powers, I don't think there will be any additional powers, but maybe I don't know whether Nigel could advise on that. I don't think there would be, but Nigel may be better to advise from a sort of legal perspective.
Nigel, are you able to respond?
I am, and the answer is no. No, I mean, going unitary wouldn't make a jot of difference to our powers on this issue. In the grand scheme of things, well, no, there isn't anything we could do for Joe Public releasing something from their own land and the consequences thereof. There was just nothing you could do to stop that at all. You could, if you had sufficient evidence of them being a nuisance, being released from our land, which obviously we've tried to preclude, so it shouldn't happen. You could introduce public space protection order onto our own land to prevent it, and that actually gives you an enforceable role then. But again, that's only on our land, and we don't currently have a problem with our land because of the very nature of this policy. So it still brings us back to, ultimately, all we're trying to do is educate rather than enforce.
Great, thank you. Councillor Godwin-Pearson, has that answered all your questions?
I think it does. I mean, I think what we need is practical action points for this. You know, we clearly can't stop people doing it, but we can educate people who would facilitate it happening. I don't think people release lanterns from their gardens. I think they do it at, you know, weddings and bar mitzvahs and, you know, that sort of thing. It's sort of a high days and holidays thing, isn't it? That people do, and there's an opportunity there for us. I mean, individual venues can stop clientele releasing them. They can, you know. So if we put it in our licensing notes, then there's an obvious action point there for wedding venues and so on.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you. Councillor Godwin-Pearce touched on a couple of things I just wanted to say. It's really about, I think that Sedgemoor's got a responsibility outside when it comes to this anyway, because they float and they mainly do go in the sea. They go into the sea, especially the plastic and the rubber balloons. And we should be looking at this from supporting ecology and other species, because they're the ones that are affected mainly as soon as they're released. They're the ones that are affected, whether they're cows. They tend to be creatures in the sea. It just gets lost in the sea and they end up in creatures in the sea. So I think that this should be part of any policy we pass on the ecological breakdown, because this is part of it. Littering and the abuse of other creatures' environments. I know we're all in the same environment, but it's, you know, it's their natural environment, and we're putting our rubbish in there, and every time they go up, I'd say 80%, I think it's about 80% lands in the sea. So I think that we should be looking our responsibility. We can't sit as a council on our own. It's got to be part of the whole system. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Rodriguez, and there is somebody else with the hand up, but I'm not sure who it is or who was first. So I'm going to go to Councillor Rodriguez first.
Can you hear me this time?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Just a technical one for you, Dave. Just out of interest, the policy that we've got prohibits the release of the balloons and lanterns from council-owned land. What would happen if someone released some balloons or lanterns, say from Coronation Park or any other council-owned land? Would they be prosecuted by the council for doing that on the land on that basis or not? I just wondered how that would work.
be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure, because we would, in terms of the, I suppose we could possibly write to them and say that they shouldn't do it. I think, I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I know in terms of the policy, we're talking more sort of organised events where people say, you know, we want to use Apex Park for something, or you know, St Matthew's Field, in which case we would say, well, you can use it, you know, here's the license for using it, so forth, from us. I'm not 100% sure on that. Again, is this something that Nigel might be able to I want to drop you in it here, Nigel, whether there's something that you can maybe sort of know a bit more about?
I can, and it's simple, and the answer is no again. You know, releasing balloons, releasing sky lanterns is not a criminal offence. It's as simple as that. Whether you do that from our land, your own land, or from any other public area, it's not a criminal offence. The issue, as we've all identified, is the consequences that arise from their release. So that's where offences are committed, or technical offences are committed, as in littering or endangering animals and things like that. But the actual act of releasing them in the first place, wherever you do it from, is not a criminal offence, and so therefore neither ourselves or the police, for that matter, could take any criminal action through the courts.
Can I just come back?
Yeah.
Councillors? That's fully understandable, but I just think that in a way then that this policy prohibiting the release of balloons and lanterns from council-owned land isn't so. I think it's in a way it's not very productive, because we can't do anything about it, although we're prohibiting it from our land. So I don't know what the point of that in our policy is if there's nothing we can do about it. But it's only my opinion, but I understand completely all the other points that are made.
Can I just respond to that very quickly? I think that the point of this policy is really to sort of discourage and educate, although we can't really enforce it. It looks to be that actually by saying to people that we do not allow this on our land, that is actually going a step towards discouraging people, because without a policy or without a clear position on it, people would not feel any limitation anyway. Some people would, I think, be prevented from releasing them just by knowing that we're saying we don't allow it. Would that be a fair point, Dave?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is about educating people, and that actually sometimes has a better effect than say the enforcement side of things. And also, I believe that, you know, this. I think people release them in parks ad hoc is probably not such a big issue as the organised events, things like weddings and so forth, or birthday parties and so forth, where people go to a specific venue, and part of that is, I mean, there used to be venues that would advertise that as part of the package, wasn't it? You know, you go and have your meal and stuff like that, and then they would release sky lanterns. So it is. You know, I think it's more trying to tackle those sorts of venues, but also educating just the public generally, really, about the dangers of it. Because some people, people sat around, obviously sat around the table here, but at this meeting, we all, most of us will know that the implications of it, because we've seen the policy, and we're up, we've read it and so forth. Whereas there will be people out there that just don't know, they'll set these things off, but they won't realise the damage, or won't think about the damage it's causing further on down the line. So again, education is, if we can educate people about it, then that sometimes has a bigger effect than if we did have enforcement powers. So yeah.
Are there any? Thank you, Dave. Are there any further questions from Councillor Gibson?
Yeah, I know there was a new shop opened up on the Lega Light, that new complex recently, and it sells balloons. That's its main thing. It sells lots of plastic things and balloons. So, and that got a go ahead. That got the go ahead. I know it's in the past, but it's those sort of things that I think that how can you discourage that? I mean, it's just, I just find the the two polars, it just blows my mind really that we can be saying, yeah, go and there's a shop, sell the stuff, and you might say it's only one balloon, but if everyone releases one balloon, there's millions of balloons up there and down there. So it was just an observation again about the hypocrisy of it all, really. From
that's again, I suppose, where the education side of thing comes in, because educating the individuals will can have an effect on their behaviour, and it's their behaviour of buying things that creates a demand for people to sell stuff, doesn't it? So if you can educate people and they can act, to do things more responsibly, or or say more responsibly, but to know the damage that some of these things are doing, then that may have the knock-on effect of reducing demand for the products.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Councillor Keane has a hand up. Before I go to Councillor Keane, do any other committee members have any questions? No? Okay, thank you. Councillor Keane?
Thank you, Chairman. Dave is quite right. We have to take the public with us, and it's education, but we are a part of the county-wide climate change action plan and policy, and for education and also for the licensing, it might be a useful action point to ask if this could be included. That the document is a living document, so subject to changing circumstances, changing information, and the county is in a far better position than us to make far wider educational points that can be reached to everyone, regardless of what the circumstances are that they want to have this this facility. And in the licensing, the one-day licenses for special events, as well as licensing public venues that are commercial. If our legal team would consider how that could be worded, and that would give us another arm. But when you talk about the consequences, the consequences are far more serious. Unfortunately, it's down to evidence. And without evidence, I think it would be very difficult to pursue anything, and could land ourselves really being in disrepute. So it really is far more complex than just the document says. But I would suggest that we try and get some of this into the county's climate change action plan for much wider educational information. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Keane. Thank you. If there is there any more debate on this, I think we have probably got to a point. Does any committee member wish to make a proposal? Because we are, I think, being asked to see whether we want to accept this policy. Is it fit for purpose as it stands, or does it need to be reviewed? I think that's where we are. Councillor Godwin-Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I don't think we can go any further with the policy as it stands, but I think we can suggest that the few points that I made, perhaps, which is to find out if we are part of the NFU's scheme to lobby the government to ban these things altogether, and if we're not, then to join it. So if you just Google it, you'll find it. And I think we ought to write to the venues and say. And warn them of the dangers, include it perhaps in the licensing notes. That would be my thoughts.
Okay. I'm happy to do that. So would somebody like to second that proposal? Councillor? Yeah. Councillor Clayton?
Yeah, happy to second.
Okay, that's fine. So, Steve, moving forward on this. Sorry, Councillor Rodriguez? Can't hear you, Councillor. I still can't hear you. No, I can.
Try speaking again, sir.
Can you hear me now?
We can indeed.
Oh, you can. Yeah, cool. Sorry, I don't know what's up with your microphone, but I thought Janet's point was quite a good one about trying to share this in the wider Somerset approach. That was all. I don't know if that's something that can be taken up as well. That's all.
Thank you. I'm going to propose that we ask Dave to look at the NFU campaign to confirm whether we are part of that or not, and if we are not, that we should ask the council to lobby the government and be part of that campaign. I'm going to ask as well that the policy itself as it stands doesn't actually include much in the way of educating in terms of including that information in our social media campaigns and things like that. And I think that might need to be reworded, but I would suggest that we might want to ask this to be included in the climate change strategy and reviewed as part of that. Does that meet with members' approval?
Yes, that's fine.
Councillor Gibson?
Yeah, there's other organisations promoting besides the NFU, like Surfers Against Sewage. I've had one for donkey's years, so and there's lots of other ones that I'm sure that you can find. But they've been trying to, and there is evidence, a lot of evidence when people are like cleaning the beaches and working within the sea. About the damage that it causes, especially the strings that are on a lot of the balloons as well that get wrapped, as well as the the suffocation it causes. But yeah, there are other ones out there. Surface Against Sewage are a one to look at as well.
Okay, do we actually need to affiliate ourselves to a campaign to do this, or can we just simply write to the government and ask for the complete ban of lanterns and balloons? Can Nigel or Dave, can you answer that one?
I think you can do whatever you want in that regard. I mean, if you want to write to the government and recommend these things be outlawed, then that's perfectly within your remit.
Okay, thank you.
I think that would be
that will be a council policy, so I'm sure that would have to go through full council. But so it would be a recommendation to full council. But it's certainly within your remit to recommend that as an approach.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Your question, my instincts tell me that being part of a national organisation may be far more effective because it will be publicly seen that this council's name is a part of their particular project, rather than just one council all on its lonesome making a submission, however valuable. But that's just a thought.
Thank you, Councillor Keane. Councillor Gibson, is your hand is up again, or is it Legacy? Can't hear you, Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, it's Legacy, but I will say something. But yeah, I mean, I guess if the NFU have got specific, but they've got a lot of ideas about a lot of subjects. They're not like a specific organisation that is aiming at sea trash and sea rubbish and biodiversity, are they? They're not really. Yeah, I can walk down a long alley here. I'll get out of it a minute.
Okay, thank you. So I will repeat. Our members, can members show if they agree with if we are not already affiliated with the NFU campaign to ban them, to proceed with going with the NFU campaign? Is anybody against? Who's against that?
Sorry, against what?
Against going with the NFU campaign if we are not already part of it. Okay. Just
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
Only, obviously fully supportive of any organisation that has that policy that we can, you know, be a part of or lobby with. But it's just, I'd feel more comfortable, whichever organisation it was, to actually see the wording exactly of what it is they're proposing, regardless of which organisation it is. Just it would make me feel more comfortable knowing what I'm supporting. That's all.
Okay, that's a good point. So would members prefer this to come back to committee with the wording that we would like for if we're going to lobby government? Okay, great. Okay, then in that case, Dave, if you could please look into that, find the wording and bring it back to the committee for the next meeting, please. Okay, thank you very much.
Chairman, it may well be something for, if it's coming back to committee, it may well be worth Mr. Cole's coming back once he's spoken to licensing to see whether they can either put some wording on the licenses or send out a flyer advising against, you know, balloon lanterns, or giving the reasons behind it with their licenses. So Mr. Cole's may be able to feedback on a preferred choice from licensing.
Okay, perhaps we could look at reinforcing the wording in the policy for education as well, and what we do with our social media and stuff at the same time as we look at the licensing side of it. Okay. Can I just one last point on this? Can I just clarify with members whether they feel that, well, perhaps it is something we can review when Dave brings it back to us again, as to whether that we need to ask for that to be included in the climate change strategy and reviewed at that point within that strategy. Okay, Councillor Godwin-Pearson.
Yeah, it's just one final thought, really. Given that these things can travel quite a long way, I wonder if we also communicate with our neighbouring authorities and county to see if we can take them with us on this journey. Because balloons released and lanterns released in Mendip, for example, could well, you know, decimate a farm in Sedgemoor. So I wonder if we take our neighbouring authorities with us on this one.
Okay, Dave, could you investigate in terms of what the situation is with our neighbouring authorities on that?
Yeah, I'll send them. I'll send them an email. What they're doing.
That's great. If you could bring that back at the same time, that'd be fantastic. Okay, thank you very much. Any further comments or observations on this item? No. Great. Steve, then I'm going to move on to item number 7. And that's the fireworks policy. This is again Dave, who's going to present the report for us. Thank you, Dave.
Okay, thank you. I'll share a copy of the policy again so that people can see it as I go through it. Yeah. So can everyone see that?
Just coming through. I can see it. Yeah. Thank you.
That's good. So as a result of the last meeting we had, I have put together a draft fireworks policy based on the discussions with members in February, and again, similar to lanterns and balloons, there isn't much in terms of enforcement powers that Environment and Health have got for dealing with this. I mean, we've got enforcement powers for quite a few things, but fireworks, unfortunately, isn't one of them. So, and I think we discussed this at the last meeting. That the primary legislation and the primary enforcer for fireworks are the police, coupled with training standards. So the police deal with, illegal setting off of fireworks or irresponsible use, dangerous use of fireworks, and training standards oversee the sales side of things, so making sure that they're not being sold to people that are underage, they're not selling things that aren't haven't passed the relevant safety standards and so forth. So the policy has been drafted with that in mind. So again, a little bit like the balloon and lantern policy, there's no primary enforcement powers for us on this. So this is really an educational policy, and it goes through some various things, which I'll go through in a second, which I've sort of looked at what we discussed and looked at what was in the RSPCA campaign and put those down, the things that we're going to try and encourage people to do, businesses to do, or members of the public to do. Again, part of that education, educating people to try and sort of take a different approach in terms of what they do with fireworks. So the policy is split into a couple of sections. First is just a general introduction, which just goes through the sort of the legal side of things and what can and can't be done by sort of lots of police and training standards. Gives you the times that currently you're allowed to let fireworks off. So again, there's no prohibition of people letting fireworks off other than after certain times of day, with the exception of certain religious celebrations and bonfire night, where the cut-offs are slightly different. So again, the policy, I've tried to go through it and, like I say, look at the things that we talked about at the last meeting. And so most of it is basically encouraging people to not use fireworks in their own homes if possible. So it's trying to encourage people to go to organised events rather than having fireworks at home. It's encouraging people, if they do have fireworks at home, because again, we can't stop them from doing it, but maybe to let their neighbours know in advance, to use less noisy fireworks. And also again for organisers of events to advertise their events in advance. So again, people know to prepare. So if they've got animals and so forth, that they can try to take those sorts of actions that can reduce the stress on animals and so forth. And also, if there's vulnerable people in the community, people that may be affected by fireworks, it gives them the opportunity to know that something's going to happen, that they can maybe take take some sort of precautions or prepare themselves for the release of the fireworks. And sort of, is again trying to encourage people to go to organised events rather than events that are ad hoc and sporadic, because people again will know that they're happening. There's a little bit in there about clearing up and disposing of firework debris. So again, it's a bit like the lantern policy. People let them off and then off they go. They see them go up in the air and that's it, and then they drop down to earth. And there's bits and pieces of these fireworks left. I think some of the fireworks these days have got less plasticky bits on them. You can buy ones, I think, which have probably got less sort of non-degradable waste in them. And another section or line of the policy is to try to encourage shops and businesses to stock quieter fireworks to reduce the impact on people. There was a section in there which I'll highlight if everyone can see this bit of the report. So I've put in there that residents and event organisers are encouraged to use lower noise fireworks, less than 97 decibels. Now I took that number, the 97 decibels, out of the RSPCA guidance, which I checked after the meeting, and that's part of what they were say advising on. Now, what their campaign was for people to ban the sale of fireworks to individual members of the public, so people will use them in their own homes, their own gardens, for private events. Reduce down the current level to 97 decibels, but not for organised events. So, but I have put this in the policy because there was a bit of debate at the last meeting about whether noise should be restricted on organised events or whether it should be restricted on just people, having, not professional events. So when I say an organised event, I don't mean someone having, a few friends around in their garden and a barbecue. I mean a big event such as they take place at, say, the jetty at Burnham-on-Sea, where you get, hundreds, thousands of people turn up potentially, and it's a big professional display. So the question was, and I think it's probably up for members to debate as to whether they wanted us to encourage the use of low noise fireworks for residents and organised events, or whether it was more for residents and encouraging people to go to organised events where they will see the louder fireworks, but where there should be, there's usually more organisation and pre-warning that they're going to happen. So that was just something which I think just needed to be discussed. And then there's a section in there again about public displays held on Sedgemoor's own land, and encouraging them to comply with this policy, and making sure that that they're aware of the policy when they undertake bookings. And there is a little section at the end on the legal standing of the policy. So again, as with the balloon and lantern issues, we don't hold, whilst there is primary legislation for fireworks, but that is enforced by the police and trading standards, we have no powers, and the police don't have powers to ban people from letting off fireworks or letting fireworks off above a certain limit. So again, the policy is more educational than enforceable.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Okay, opening up to questions first for Dave. Councillor Godwin-Pearson.
Thank you, Dave. Another comprehensive strategy. Thank you. Look, I mean, I think this is kind of similar to our last debate, and I would imagine that more people are aware of the effects of fireworks on animals. Probably less so. I don't think people are as aware of the effect of fireworks on vulnerable people and the elderly. And you know, they can be very disturbing for some people. I mean, I don't particularly have a problem with loud fireworks at these big organised events. I think, you know, when I was a kid, we didn't have fireworks at home. That wasn't a thing. We'd go to the park on bonfire night, and we'd, you know, and we'd witness them there and then. And that is part of the community, really. I wouldn't want to come across as the fun police making all the fireworks at public events really, really quiet. Actually, if the ones at the big public events are the proper ones, the loud ones, but we can discourage the use of loud ones at private events, then we're killing two birds with one stone, aren't we? Because people will think, well, yeah, we can only buy really quiet fireworks. Let's go to the big one down the road. Away from livestock, away from pets, away from vulnerable people. You know, you're not going to take your cat to a firework display. And if we perhaps can have a think about including some wording to the venues, you know, in the same way that we might be with the balloons and lantern release policy, that could go some way to educating venue owners and you know, people celebrating stuff about what the actual dangers are.
Yeah, no, I think from what you're saying, I think that's the impression that I got from the last meeting, was that to restrict, you know, for example, having really quiet fireworks at the display at Burnham-on-Sea Jetty or at St Matthew's Field may actually not be feasible, but it would, you know, the fireworks are released a long way away from everyone because of the health and safety implications. And if the fireworks are too quiet, then no one with I don't know, 5,000 people standing around or 1,000 people standing around, then no one's going to be able to hear them. So that was my concern, is that we may try to, if we try to force all the, you know, so not, again, we haven't got any legal powers, but to try to stop people from using louder fireworks at organised professional events may just backfire in that, you know, the events just won't, you know, they just won't, one, they won't comply with it, and two, the events won't, you know, people probably won't be able to hear the fireworks because there'll be so much background noise from people standing around and the distance to which they're let off. So yeah.
Yeah, can I just come back on that quickly? I think whilst there is an argument to make all fireworks really quiet because of the effect on wildlife, and you know, in Burnham you've got loads of seagulls trying to roost and that sort of thing. I think the problem with making the big public displays really quiet is the attendance would drop because people would rather have the loud fireworks in their own gardens, you know. and you want to sort of try and have some control, as much control over it as we can.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to go to Councillor Rodriguez, I think was the first one with his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just a question, Dave. Considering, as far as I'm aware, some parish and town councils, they put on their own firework displays for different events and whatnot. So I wondered, have we had any sort of communication with town and parish councils to mimic the policy that we may be putting forward? Or if not, is that something that we can do so that it's all kind of the same, we're on the same kind of, you know, place with it all?
I haven't as yet spoken to town and parish councils, but I think what I was hoping was that if we can get I wanted to get the policy agreed by Sedgemoor first, and then we could try some communication with them to just, you know, maybe send them the policy and say, look, this is what we're doing. Is, you know, can you either, I suppose, adopt a policy of your own, or at least endorse our policy, you know, or support our policy as part of your, you know, as part of your activities.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, thank you. I've got to disagree with Councillor Govan-Pearce. I think that these quieter fireworks are quite loud. They are fairly loud anyway, and I don't know where you're going to go, where you think you're not going to disrupt something. If you're going to go to a field somewhere, what you're not going to, it's just the dogs sort of right in town that you don't want to disturb, or it's not the birds in the countryside or the other animals living in the countryside. If people decide to not go because they don't think it's, you know, the fireworks are loud enough, well, you know, people get used to things maybe, and they may appreciate the reasons why. I mean, besides, there are suggestions of having fireworks that don't make any noise at all. I mean, I'd rather have them maybe a little bit of noise, and not necessarily, I don't personally like loud fireworks at all, but yeah, it's just another point of view, I guess. That I still think you get people along, and I just don't understand where you've got these areas where you're gonna have really loud fireworks. I don't see the point of the policy then at all. What is it, just to encourage people to these places and not have them at home? I don't understand what the policy is if you're not going to make them lower, you know, and fit in with what the RSPCA have done and studied, and their scientists have studied. I just don't get, well, what's the point of the policy if we're not going to have them, lower? And it, you know, and what it said about all the, these places aren't just isolated under bubbles, they're still going to affect, you know, people and farm animals and companion animals, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Govan-Pearce? You got your hand up. I can't hear you, sorry.
Sorry, there's that mute button. I mean, I think that's exactly the point, isn't it? Is that you sort of take a nudge approach to it. We haven't got enforcement powers, so if we make the public events damp squibs, then people are just going to set off fireworks in their own gardens. If we can make the show the big one and the public events, then people will go to that perhaps instead, and then we've got a degree of control. Ultimately, I'm sure in the future there'll be national legislation to limit the volume of fireworks, and then retailers won't be able to sell any loud ones at all, and then public displays can be quieter too. But in the meantime, we've got to find a way to nudge people towards we've got to find a way to nudge our communities towards a few displays in places where we can control the situation and make sure we clean up the mess and give people plenty of warning to put their pets indoors and so on, and discourage people from having noisy fireworks at home. I'd have thought that's the point.
Thank you, Councillor. Dave, did you want to come back on that? You got your hand up.
Oh yeah, I don't know if it'd help if I shared what was on the RSPCA website, because I think a lot of this sort of, I say, debates and the policy was sort of came out of the RSPCA campaign for reducing the noise of fireworks. And what they've got, and if I try and share the screen with you, what they've got is they're basically saying, and this is where this is why I've raised this now, is that they're saying, let me just put it on the screen. It's probably easier to show you while it's on the actual screen. What? Oh wait, can people see that at the moment?
It's still coming through at the moment. For me anyway, I've got a slow connection. Yeah, okay.
So the RSPCA campaign was for reducing the maximum permitted noise level of fireworks to 97 decibels, about the same level of a noise as a door slamming. Fireworks louder than this would only be used for licensed public displays. And I don't know whether that assists members in looking at this, in that, you know, the RSPCA aren't saying all fireworks. I think they obviously realise that, you know, if you made all fireworks 97 decibels, it's probably impractical. Whereas, you know, I think what they're saying is for people having them in their own garden, or if they're having a party and stuff like that, then they should be 97 decibels. People don't know when they're going to let them off. People just fire these things off. Whereas, you know, like it says there, fireworks louder than this would only be used for licensed public displays. So something like the fireworks for the carnival on St Matthew's Field, you know, that's a licensed public display, so that would be allowed to use larger fireworks. It's well publicised. People know when it's happening. And again, things like the fireworks off the jetty at Burnham-on-Sea, again, a public display which should be allowed to use louder fireworks. In many respects, this policy is that, you know, we can't enforce some of this unless it's on our own land. But I think, you know, from personal experience, you know, in terms of enforcement and environmental health and so forth, you know, if you put something in place which is unenforceable to a certain extent, then, you know, it does make the policy useless. Whereas if we're doing this for education and people, you know, members of the public who are having displays in their gardens are using less loud fireworks, that's going to massively reduce the problem. And again, people go into then the bigger displays, the organised, well publicised displays that comply with all the health and safety requirements and so forth. You know, that allows those louder fireworks to be done in controlled areas where people, you know they're going to happen and people expect that it's going to happen. So I just thought I'd put that on the screen just to aid members in when they think about this.
Thank you, Dave. Good point. Very interesting. Does anybody want to come back on that? Councillor Rodriguez?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just wondering, because that paragraph you just showed us, Dave, kind of makes it all a bit more clearer, really, for me. And I wondered if we can amend that bullet point about the residents and event organisers encouraged to use low noise fireworks and add something similar to the RSPCA one, because that makes it more clearer. And also, I was completely unaware as to what 97 decibels actually was in terms of sound. And so I just looked online. 90 is a lawnmower, power tool, blender. 100 is an MP3 player at full volume, just for your knowledge as well, because I didn't have a clue. And I don't think it sounds too bad if it's an organised event.
Okay, thank you. So is everybody happy with that point being amended as proposed by Councillor Rodriguez? Yeah. Just Councillor Gibson, you're not in agreement? I can't see everybody on the screen, so forgive me if I'm not picking up head nods or other disagreements, but I think it makes sense. We are only encouraging those, not enforceable. But if we are going to align ourselves with the recommendations of the RSPCA, that would seem to make sense to me. If there is just Councillor Gibson who is against and everybody else is for, I would say we go with that amendment. Okay. Right. Can I also ask if it's possible to have a look at the first paragraph on the policy, Dave?
Back on the screen.
Thank you. It's the wording just cause concern to vulnerable people within the community or people who may have pets or livestock, etc. I think something about them being a source of fear and distress to animals. I'm not sure that the concern is just the people who may have pets. It's about the fear and distress that is caused to animals. I think that paragraph needs to be reworded a bit.
Yeah. Okay. I'll put a
It's about the animals themselves rather than the people who own them.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll amend that I'll put a note on it. So, and I will make an amendment to the final policy.
Okay, great, thank you. And the last question I had was about the public displays held on council-owned land. So the wording is the council will encourage firework event organisers. As it's on our land, and I know it's very difficult to enforce, but it's not possible to say that council requires firework event organisers using council-owned land to follow the guidelines.
Yes, I think we can. Well, I assume we can do that if people are booking directly via us. I suppose originally I was hesitant to put that in there when we had the 97 decibel limits because I thought that's just going to be potentially impossible to do. Not impossible, but it's going to be very tricky to do that. The rest of the bits and pieces in there about advertising and so forth, I'm pretty sure unless there's any legal reason why we couldn't, if someone is using our land, I'm pretty sure we can include that in sort of the agreement or pack that's sent out to anyone who rents our land for fireworks display.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think there was the last thing about educating on the precautions. Let me just see if I can find where's the section about educating people on here? Oh yeah, on the promotion via website, etc. So the bit just below the bit about council-owned land, it says about the impact of fireworks on vulnerable people, animals, and the environment. But also, I think we need to educate on the precautions that can be taken to mitigate the impact. So just a little bit of wording to add, I think. You're muted, Dave, sorry.
I will add some wording into that to that effect.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I think you can stop screen sharing now. If you may have already done that, but it's a bit slow on my side. Thank you. Are members all happy for Dave to go ahead and make those amendments? Do we need that document to come back to us first, or are members happy for that to be amended and go to executive for approval, for consideration? Yeah,
I'm happy to propose it with those amendments.
Okay, anybody like to second that? Councillor Rodriguez, thank you. Any members against that? Okay, that's fine. So Steve, are you okay with that?
Yes, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you. One last point on that was about whether we ask whether we want the council to lobby government about restricting the noise level. That's something that we haven't really decided on whether we want to do. So can I just ask members how they feel about that? Councillor, I'm going to go to Councillor Godwin-Pearson first.
Thank you. I don't see any harm in it. I mean, I think we ought to also maybe take our neighbours along with it too, and maybe county, see if we can have a sort of a joined up approach with it. It's one of those things that will be coming anyway, so we might as well, you know, be trailblazers, as it were.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Keane.
Am I off? Thank you. Those buttons. I would like, going back to a previous discussion, the county-wide climate change declaration and strategy does contain a clause where they give themselves the obligation, and that's on everyone's behalf, to lobby central government concerning the various legislative changes that may, or amendments that may need to happen. And perhaps I think county over the last year has had a lot of other things to think about, but it's perhaps time that they were nudged into fulfilling some of those particular clauses, because this is not the only one that needs central government assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm not quite sure really at that point then. I think Councillor Godwin-Pearson, were you proposing that we do ask the council to lobby government for the limiting the sale of fireworks to 7 decibel?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody like to second that proposal? Councillor Rodriguez, thank you. Anybody against that? Okay, that's fine. Then I say that the committee has decided to recommend to the executive that the council lobbies the government to limit the sale of fireworks to 90 decibel. Okay. All right, Steve, is that noted?
Yes, Chairman. It'd be either the executive or the full council, but we'll sort that out. Okay,
lovely. Thank you. Okay, any other comments or observations on this item? Okay, I will proceed. Thank you very much to Dave for your work on both of those items. Much appreciated. Thank you. So moving on to item 8, we have a report on the Ecological Emergency Declaration. So this has come back to us following work by the Community Scrutiny Committee Working Group, and I'm going to hand over now to Christy Blackwell, who's going to present the report for me. Thank you.
Chair, hello everybody. Lovely afternoon to see you all. Okay, so hopefully you will have all had an opportunity to read the report that I'd written. Apologies that there was a suggestion that I was going to be bringing the amendments from our consultation exercise internally verbally. I do hope you also had an opportunity to read the document that came out at the end of last week that provided those amendments for you. I won't go through the background that's brought us to where we are today. I think that's been captured quite comprehensively in the report, but I will just give a little bit of context to the discussion today. So the climate emergency was recognised by Sedgemoor District Council in January 2021. And at that time, there was a late suggestion that that perhaps an ecological emergency could be declared at the same time. Decision was made to actually call that into scrutiny as the climate change strategy was completed. So we didn't want to add it in at that stage without some scrutiny. So it was called in, and as the chair suggested, there was a working group formed to look at what we might need to do as a local authority to declare an ecological emergency. And that working party prepared some wording that constitutes the declaration potentially, and that's what's been circulated to you. The ecological emergency declaration wording has gone through each of the political parties for discussion. However, we were aware that it hadn't been through some of our internal colleagues within the council for their input. And so that exercise has been carried out, hence why we're bringing that back to committee today, and for some discussion around the next steps as to where we take this discussion. Would it be helpful, Chair, if I perhaps share the document that was circulated on Friday so that everybody's got that in view?
Yeah, that'd be fine, thank you.
I'll just find it in my records. Hopefully you'll be able to see that shortly. Okay, so there's broadly three kind of themes that have come out of that internal consultation. And what I'll say at this stage is I do have colleagues hopefully on the call with us today, Pete Granger, our ecologist, and also Nick Tate, our senior planning policy colleague, who may be able to respond to any technical questions that come out of the discussion that follows after this. So the three main areas of discussion that came out of the internal consultation centred around, one, the title of this document and what we were aiming to achieve. So we've called this an ecological emergency declaration, and our intention was, as Community Scrutiny's intention was to forward this on as a recommendation to Council that it declares an ecological emergency. The climate strategy that was developed for the Council, at the time of developing that earlier this year, we recognised the climate emergency. So there has been some feedback in terms of is it appropriate for us to declare? I think that's something down to wording and perhaps a discussion that you may want to have. I will just say we do have neighbouring authorities, as you'll know, Mendip and South Somerset District Council both declared a climate emergency and ecological emergency at the same time and developed their strategies, and they all form one strategy. And our colleague Somerset West and Taunton, they followed their climate declaration with an ecological declaration some 6 months afterwards. Just for a bit of context. So the main bulk of the feedback that came through is around the evidence base that we are using in order to put forward this declaration. So we know that nationally there's a decline in species and habitats, and that's evidenced in the State of the Nature report. But it's we haven't got a body of evidence that will show what the picture is for Sedgemoor and where we might need to align some of our efforts in terms of developing an action plan. We do know, however, and as Andrew has clearly pointed out in his comments, that the Somerset Levels and Moors water quality has been downgraded to unfavourable and declining. So there is clearly some impacts there that, should you wish to, that there shows there is a need to take some action around that particular issue. It's probably worth saying at this point that in our development of the document you see in front of you, we did do some research with outside partner agencies, for example, the Somerset Environmental Records Centre. who actually fed back to us that they could do some work on our behalf to find local information for Sedgemoor as part of the data gathering exercise and monitoring that they are doing with Somerset County Council, but that may come at a cost. We did use information such as the Somerset Biodiversity Strategy, the Somerset Pollinator Action Plan, and the Somerset Rivers Authority annual report. And I do know that Councillor Janet Keane, as our portfolio holder, also contacted the Quantox Landscape Partnership Scheme, who had suggested that they were going to be doing some auditing on the Quantox, but unfortunately due to the pandemic that hadn't been carried out to date. Also worth noting is that we are paying a contribution to the Local Nature Partnership as part of the work that's coming out of the Environment Bill that's going through Parliament at the moment around local nature recovery partnerships and delivery action plans. So there could well be some work coming out of that, which will be very relevant to the Sedgemoor area and what our particular issues are as well. So there's the evidence base. And then finally, in terms of the three main things that kind of came out of it, our colleagues in Clean Surroundings make the good point that actually an awful lot of the activity that they would be undertaking as part of an ecological emergency are already captured in our climate strategy. Lots of emergencies, I have to remember. So, for example, they are doing some work around policy that's prohibiting the use of insecticides. They're doing wildflower planting, and they're also restricting the use of peat-based products. So we do have a number of nature-based actions in our climate strategy as well, and action plan. Finally, I'll just mention that we have entered into a partnership with Somerset West and Taunton, as you should all know, in terms of delivering on our climate action plan. And we are, as part of that partnership, paying a contribution to a ecological project manager whose role it will be to develop a strategy and action plan for Sedgemoor in line with Somerset West and Taunton as well. So probably a joint council document, which will then give us an action plan specifically around ecological issues. So if I just scroll down, sorry, hopefully you'll have seen at the beginning that the yellow highlighted areas are suggested text to include, and the blue was suggested text to remove. So you'll see specifically there's one additional action that's been suggested by colleagues, which was around undertaking that evidence-based piece of work and to use that potentially to bring back a declaration for an ecological emergency if this is evidenced using that piece of using that activity. So I think for me, kind of bringing this issue back into scrutiny, I do feel like what needs to be discussed are what the next steps for this piece of work. As I've mentioned, we do have some of this addressed in our climate emergency information. I think there needs to be some thought around the actual action of making a declaration or recognising an ecological emergency, and which comes first, whether we make that declaration based on national evidence and then undertake a local exercise around evidence gathering, or whether we do that evidence gathering to prove the activity that we need to do at a local level, which will then obviously align very closely to the resource that we have as part of our Somerset West and Taunton partnership. I'm aware I spoke an awful lot then and didn't take an awful lot of breath, so hopefully you all stayed with me. As I say, Nick and Pete are with me on the call and can hopefully answer any technical questions if you've got anything specific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christy, and apologies. Thank you for introducing the other officers. Apologies for not having done that myself when I started the item. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to start by again opening this up to technical questions to committee members, please. Don't know whether Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, thank you. The last point you make, Kirsty, can't we just get on with it? And just there's enough evidence around and evidence base out there. It's just like loads. This is unbelievable that this wasn't done a year ago, I'm afraid. But yeah, I mean, gather it, put the money into it, gather the evidence you need so that it's got more of a direction. But we just need to get on with it now and just declare it. And there's so much we could be doing. Yeah, please just do it.
I would add, I guess, that the declaration or lack of hasn't restricted any of the work that obviously we're doing and Pete's obviously doing. So there is activity ongoing. But I do hear what you're saying. Thank you.
Can I just add another one? You did bring up about Pete and about not restricted. Was that the word you used? Use. Surely we should be not using Pete at all. There's no reason why we should be, or sourcing it and buying it and supporting this activity at all.
Okay, thank you. I do understand there are I don't know what our Clean Surroundings colleagues' policy is in making that change. I know it's something that's definitely on their radar. I don't know whether it's there's cost implications or whether there's stock implications, but it's certainly something that they are looking to address.
Okay, thank you.
Pete, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, if I can provide a little bit of context about the peat. Basically, Clean Surrounds haven't been using peat themselves for some years now. However, some of the suppliers do still use peat, and it's getting those suppliers to stop using peat that has been the issue with us being able to say that we're completely peat free. So in effect, we are, from our own point of view, peat free, but we do indirectly use some peat. But I think that is being dealt with now. The main issue is that we get a lot of our planting stock from Taunton Dean. They do still use peat there, but I think they are addressing that issue now.
Thank you, Pete. Councillor Gibson, did you want to come back? Your hand is still showing us up. Okay, thank you. Any other questions, technical questions about the report to the officers? No, expected a lot more. Okay, in that case, can I just, I know I think Councillor Keane is still with us. I just wanted to offer the opportunity if she wanted to make any additional comments on this report.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as Kirsty has mentioned, we are in a partnership now with Somerset West and Taunton, but we have not yet had our first meeting, and I am impatient that we should, because there are several actions that within our own house we have discussed that we would like to add to the work programme for them. For example, Sedgemoor has got a lot of water, but so far the working parties have not included inviting the drainage board to participate in any of our discussions. They have their own ecologist who specialises in waterways and the maintenance of the bankings of the waterways, both fresh water and the controlled water. And I think it's extremely important, because there's also, as we've said previously today, there's a lot of public education needed. For example, the drainage board ecologist has on more than one occasion found private people emptying the contents of their private ponds into the public waterways, bringing with it God knows what type of species, invasive species that are harmful to the natural world, plus any viruses that may have been incubating very nicely, thank you, in a private garden. And there is some evidence of that. But as Kirsty mentioned, one of our colleagues in another department, one of the policy officers, did say more evidence. And I think evidence is absolutely key, because if we have evidence of species, and that would follow audits, then that would enable us to counter unfair and perhaps ill-informed criticism from those who are not as concerned as we are about their local environment. Until we have met and had a proper discussion with our colleagues at Somerset West and Taunton, I'm in two minds about holding back on this, because I think we need to speak with one voice. As I've said before, in another committee, in due course, when this does eventually go to full council, what I would not like to see is a divided vote of winners and losers. This is so important that I feel that when we finally get it right, it is acceptable and approved by everybody. And I know this may not be what you want to hear, but it may need a bit more work and a little more time if you are willing to go along with that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Councillor Keane. Councillor Gibson, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the evidence that, you know, what the problems that are going on in the reams and the waterways in through Sedgemoor are a lot to do with chemical fertilizers going on the land and animal effluent going into the waters. I mean, that's been proven and shown, and that just wanted to make that point, because you said about, you know, building up the evidence. The evidence is out there with all the reports that came forward, and I really don't want to sit on this any longer. It needs to move forward. Things can change and move when people join together. I think we should make our statement on this, and then other people would join, I'm sure. And I don't think people will want to really hold back. And you know, when evidence comes forward, it can always be added. It can always be added, like, because that's how science works. You know, things are proven and then they move forward, and we try and do so, and then we try and action things. You know, act on things. And I think I see this as an action that we should move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Nick Tate, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Just a couple of things, actually, just on the evidence, because I suppose a lot of those comments came from our service. You know, and understandably, planning is an evidence-based discipline. We have a housing crisis based on evidence of housing need. Obviously got a climate change crisis emergency based again on evidence. And our point here was, whilst there was national, you know, the national picture was clear, just locally, possibly actually a mixed picture. We're aware of certain areas where there's key sort of decline, but other areas where status is improving. So we just, you know, from our position, before making, I didn't know what the criteria were for declaring an emergency. When you know, when do we become an emergency, and equally, when do you stop becoming an emergency? So having a baseline so that everyone is clear, and that would also help us refine our focus, because in certain areas we may be finding that all the work that goes on at the moment is having a really positive impact, and therefore we need to focus on those other areas. And the issue of phosphates was an interesting one that Councillor Gibson just mentioned, because, and again picking up on the point earlier, saying with or without a declaration, there's a huge amount of going on in this area. Obviously we've got a whole raft of policies which come into play through a planning process. We've got an environment bill which will at some stage move to royal assent. But in terms of phosphates, you know, there you've got an example of all of the districts and the county council united in addressing the phosphate issues that are impacting on the Ramsar site, and that's probably the biggest single issue at the moment. So with or without a declaration, that focus, that and that joint work is progressing at a pace in order to find a long-term solution, which will also involve the creation of new wetlands mitigation, changing practices, changing farming practices. So that's all going on at the moment. So from the reason we made our comments, I think, was we would just be more comfortable to just have a, shall we say, a position now which says this is what has meant we now feel we need to actually go that extra step and declare an emergency, and it is clear what the impacts are, but also what it becomes clear how you're going to address those and how you're going to move to a more favourable status. And I believe that, as was mentioned, organisations such as CERC, do have that information. So it would be a relatively, there may be some resource issues involved, but probably a relatively quick process in terms of drawing out that evidence base. I suppose, so again, from a policy point of view, we were just saying perhaps just a brief, putting things slightly in a different order: evidence first, declaration second, but in no way would it be impacting or reducing the amount of effort and work that's going on in this area by officers across this council and all councils in the county. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. I'm not sure who was first. Councillor Rodriguez.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Nick. I think the points that Nick made makes me feel quite reassured, knowing that there's already a lot going on without having declared a climate an ecological emergency. And I also feel, in a way, declaring an ecological emergency without the local evidence wouldn't be as good as bringing local evidence forward when we're already doing so much work in May, as Nick has mentioned. So I would support the local evidence coming forward before declaring a climate emergency, knowing that we're already doing a lot behind the scenes anyway without having declared that emergency first.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gibson, is that a legacy hand? No.
We don't sit in Sedgemoor on our own. It is going on. It's a worldwide thing. We've got to announce emergency. We should have done it a year ago or more. When other councils were doing it, we've got to do it now, and it's got to come forward. Evidence is going to come forward all the time, and projects are and there's going to be emergency for years and years to come. And we need to do it now. We need to do it today. It's obscene that you can't think that we don't sit in a world and all of this is going on, and we're part. Sedgemoor isn't on its own, and it should happen today, right now. I just don't understand why you were holding back on this.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Right, I think, would any other members like to add to this debate? I can't see any more committee members, so I'll go to Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Just to respond in a way to Councillor Gibson, I was quite surprised to learn last week that, in fact, not every local authority, a very small percentage of local authorities in the United Kingdom have actually declared an ecological emergency. So I think our hesitation in doing it without more facts, more verifiable evidence, gives us far more gravitas understanding when it does eventually come through. But I think Kirsty will tell you just what the low percentages of other authorities in the United Kingdom that have declared this emergency. And we regard our own environment as extra special, but that's to us. There are so many other areas of the United Kingdom that are outstanding in its beauty and special structure. And some of them have not gone to this stage for their own reasons.
Thank you, Councillor Keane. Can I just ask, I'm not sure whether Pete might be the best person to answer this question, but nationally, the ecological emergency has been declared based on evidence? Is that?
To be absolutely honest with you, I'm not sure there's a specific ecological emergency nationally that's been recognised to the best of my knowledge. Christy might be aware of something, but I think basically the government is working on the Environment Bill, and the work is coming through that to address nature recovery. And so there are a number of strategies, other strategies going on at the moment on a national basis, but there's not an equivalent to the ecological emergency that I'm aware of on a national basis.
Thank you. Councillor Gibbs.
I'd agree. Sorry, I'd agree. And what you said about the Environment Bill is the response.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
The gravitas comes with declaring an emergency and then having action, you know, having actions in place, which I know are happening. Maybe we should look, maybe this will come in November, that the government might get its act together and say, you know, this is declaration. Maybe it doesn't do that. Maybe it doesn't do that thing. It's leaving it to the local councils, and that's not my. That's. It shouldn't matter who's. You know, all councils are different. They're built with different political persuasions. You know, I don't know about them. But it's what we should be doing, and I just can't. If this doesn't go through today, it's just sad.
Thank you, Councillor, because I think the point of my question really was if there is a national ecological emergency that is recognised or declared, we are, like I think you said earlier, we're not by ourselves. You know, and biodiversity is not limited to the boundaries of Sedgemoor. So if there is a national ecological emergency, to me that is evidence enough that we also are subject to that. And the national trend is very likely to be reflected in Sedgemoor. Although I agree that we need to look at the evidence base to identify how that plays out in Sedgemoor and which species are being affected and what needs to be done. I'm not sure that we do need the evidence base locally to actually acknowledge the fact that there is an emergency, an ecological emergency. I think that's where my point's coming from. That's why I wanted to kind of clarify the national picture, because the national picture is us. We are part of the country. You know, we can't isolate ourselves. So I think that's where I'm struggling with, really, to be honest. Councillor Gibson, is that your hand up again? You want to come back?
I need because with the due respect of the members here, the government, you know, where are they? What are they doing? What have they been doing? They've not been doing a lot. Central government, they've not been doing a lot. So I really don't think we should compare ourselves with what's going on there. But yeah, like you said, Councillor Bruce, that we've got to look at the whole and where we want to go, where the gravitas is. I really hope we do pass this today.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gibson. Any other input from or debate from committee members? Okay, we've been sorry, Councillor Gibson again.
Just one minute, I just got a message. It's not, it is to do with the meeting. Oh yeah, okay. It's just yeah, sorry, it was about the meeting from Councillor Smedley about the declaration. So I've just read that. Sorry, I shouldn't have brought that to the meeting.
All right, thank you. So we've been given a couple of options, I think, here. One of them really is that we, as a committee, recommend the ecological emergency declaration that was the result of the working group as it stands. I think that's one option that we have. The other option is to consider, obviously consider the revised declaration wording that we were presented with a few days ago. I possibly would like to present a third option, which would be to maybe revise the declaration that came from the working group in a slightly different way to what's being proposed. I'm going to start by asking members, committee members, whether they want to proceed with recommending the declaration as it stands, as it came out of the working group. And Steve, could you help me just in terms of, I think we have 6 committee members plus myself present, is that right? Because Alexia left.
Yeah, there's seven committee members present.
That's it, including me?
Yes.
Right, okay. Okay, so can I ask members if anybody would like to proceed with recommending the declaration as it stands from the working group? Okay, so I'm going to take that as a no, I think. Councillor Gibson? I don't know, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. Can you say that again, please? Because there was a call coming in on my phone and I couldn't quite hear.
Okay, so just whether you wish to recommend that we as a committee recommend the ecological emergency declaration as it came out of the working group, so without the revisions that have been proposed.
Yeah, I would like to go with that, please.
Okay.
So is that seconded at all, Chairman?
Is that seconded? I don't think it is. Okay. So the next thing I'd like to ask is, would any members like to recommend the revised declaration wording that's been proposed to us? Councillor Rodriguez, okay.
Yeah, can I just double check? Is that the one which is the amended version that we've got, which in the bit where it says the council resolves to working with key partners to get clear local evidence based? Is that the one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah, happy to second that.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Can I don't know whether I can do this now in terms of procedure. It was more whether on this revision that's been put forward, whether it's possible to recognise the ecological emergency rather than declare it. I am concerned that we are going to push it back and we don't have a deadline in that revision. But this has already gone to the working group and it's already come back again, and it's going to take quite a while to go through, and how we don't have anything in this revision that actually says how long it's going to take to gather this evidence base, when we might be in a position to declare an ecological emergency. That's my concern with it. Councillor Gibson?
Perhaps we can say 5 years.
Chair, perhaps if I may, if that was the recommendation that you put forward to Council Executive to consider, it would be at that point, obviously, that we would find out from our external colleagues whether that piece of work can be commissioned and the timescales involved in doing that. I haven't gone out and sought that information at this stage because I'm not sure whether that was going to be the outcome.
Right, okay, that's fine. Steve, can I just ask a point of a technical point?
Yes, Chairman.
As chair, can I second or not?
I don't see any reason why you can't, but it's already been seconded, I believe, by Councillor Clayton. If you're proposing an amendment to what's already been, because we need to vote on that, it's been proposed and seconded. But if you're proposing an amendment to what Councillor Rodriguez has proposed, and Councillor Rodriguez and Councillor Clayton are happy with that, that can be the proposal, is to take the amended one with your amendments, should they choose to do so.
Okay.
Or we can vote, or is it voted on and it doesn't go through, and then we have a third or a fresh slate.
Okay, Councillor Godwin Pearson, you want to add to that? You're muted.
You're muted. Sorry. It's clear we do have a problem, and that problem is national. And I think getting an idea of what we're facing locally is really important if we're going to tackle that. What I don't want to go down the line of is political platitudes that then end up with no targets and no action points. There are things that the council can do to a lot of things that the council can do to address biodiversity in Sedgemoor, and if we are able to if we're able to look at exactly what species are in decline where and caused by what, then we can do more about it than if we just say, yeah, we've got to do something. So I mean I'm in favour of of getting more supporting evidence, but perhaps with a deadline. As Lee says, it could take a long time. Let's not make it 5 years. We've got the COP26 coming up in November. It's a really important deadline, and we'll all the councils will be expected to do something after that. If we've got an idea of how we're going to approach it before then that'd be absolutely brilliant. But I'd really like to see some facts and figures.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Councillor. I agree. I think we do need facts and figures, but I think that's something that comes once we start working on it. And I think we just need to acknowledge that emergency does exist. We just, afterwards, the facts and figures and finding the evidence is defining what it looks like. But we do know that it exists. Councillor Rodriguez, would you be willing to amend your proposal to either include a deadline or to acknowledge that an ecological emergency exists?
Yeah, I think I'd be quite. I think to be realistic, is a deadline perhaps would be more what I would go for. And I'd ask Christy, what is a feasible deadline? Would the next community scrutiny meeting be a good deadline to report back with the evidence or not? And kind of take it from what Christy says there.
Thank you, Councillor Rodriguez. I think, as I've already mentioned, I've not gone out to those third parties to find out what the what the capacity would be to be able to deliver on that. I do know, however, as Councillor Gibson has mentioned, there is an awful lot of information out there. An exercise needs to be done to pull that all together into an evidence paper, into a baseline. As I've already mentioned, we do have our resource coming online with Somerset West and Taunton, and the recruitment process has been done. That post is going to be filled in the first week of October. So I believe, is Scrutiny quarterly or is it 6 weekly? If you give me an idea of that.
I think the next one is November we have. Hang on. So the next one is November, and then we've got January.
Okay, so I guess it depends on where you go with the recommendation, because if you go with the recommendation that's been made and seconded, then this would be going forward to Council Executive to consider that acknowledgement or that declaration, with either the evidence being done before or after that point. So I was told when the next Council Executive is. I think that's October. So I guess the upshot is it's difficult for me to put down exactly now when I can get that information back, because that's to a certain extent out of my hands. However, I can certainly make those connections and see what that might be, to give us a kind of an idea of when we might be able to get that evidence pulled together. Suitably vague.
Come back, Chair. If that's all right.
Yep.
I think based on what Chris has said, I'd be quite happy knowing that she'll do everything she can to get all the evidence to us in the quickest way possible. And so I don't think that would need amending, only because it seems quite difficult to put a date to it. but I know she'd probably do everything she can to get it to us as quickly as possible, the evidence.
Okay, so perhaps without putting a proper deadline in there, can we just add some wording to the effect in a timely manner or something similar, so that we're not leaving it open-ended completely? You know, recognizing the emergency of the situation even might go some way to sort of saying, we know that this is a problem, we can't sit on this, we need to deal with this, we need to deal with it now, and we will deal with it quickly. That's the kind of thing that I'd like to see in there, and that would make me give me a bit more reassurance.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Councillor Rodriguez, was that a legacy hand?
Sorry, I was just wondering what's the exact wording that you're proposing? Sorry, I couldn't quite understand.
Sorry, I'm happy to leave the exact wording to Christy if that's okay, in terms of procedure, but really it's just adding something in point 2 about when it will come back to members. So report this back to members, or sorry, I'm perhaps suggesting that we add in an extra point onto that rather than adding into an existing one, to recognise that the point 1 and 2 above needs to be done in the most timely manner possible because of the importance of the ecological emergency that we may be facing.
I think if I may, I think your confusion is kind of mirrored for me, in that the document that we're all looking at and that has been changed and amended slightly was originally what we were going to be recommending to council, that would be a declaration. So I think what we're using it for now is almost Scrutiny's recommendation to executive. So it's kind of changed the context slightly of the document, in that it's not the council's declaration. This almost is the work that community scrutiny have done to set the context to the position that we're in, and the numbered proposals there are what we recommend, community scrutiny recommend to council executive as the next steps. Is that fair? Because that's how I see this document now, as opposed to a formal declaration that is going to be put forward as a council statement.
It's no longer a declaration as it stands, I think that's right. It is a recommendation to the executive. Steve, can you confirm that that's what we're looking at here?
I think that would be the case, yes, Chairman.
Okay. So Councillor Rodriguez, your proposal, let me just go back to where, sorry. Sorry, I'm just going back to some wording. Okay. So your proposal, I'm sorry, your proposal was that we would recommend. Can you just repeat your proposal, just so I'm sure?
Yeah, it was the amended points made in that document, which I have to, about the getting a clear local evidence base, reporting back to members with a view to declaring an ecological emergency if this is evidenced. But I think it would be fine to add, you know, as quickly as physically possible. I think would be quite fair. I think, you know, it says in there that we may declare an emergency when this evidence comes back. So I think as quickly as possible, physically possible, would be quite a fair addition, I would suggest.
So I think then the recommendation is slightly different then. So the recommendation is that we put forward these action points to the executive for consideration. With that amendment about the doing it in as quickly as physically possible. Steve, can you just confirm, because we've moved from what was looking at the recommending a declaration, and now we're recommending that the executive look at the declaration. And I'm just a bit confused as to exactly the wording of this, sorry.
So effectively what we're looking, if I just park Councillor Rodriguez's proposal, seconded by Councillor Clayton, if we just park to one side, what you're now looking at is recommending to the on that revised document is effectively the action points, recommending, you know, you acknowledge as a national ecological emergency, and you're asking the executive to undertake those 7 actions plus the one with adding more as quickly as possible. In which case, if somebody proposes that and that's seconded, we would traditionally have to vote on Councillor Rodriguez's initial, but that could be if members are so choose not to vote on that, and that's then falls. We then have this as a new motion proposed and seconded, if that's the case, and take that forward. Does that make sense, Chairman?
Okay, I think so. Councillor Rodriguez, are you happy with that?
Or if Councillor Rodriguez withdraws his proposal.
He withdraws it.
Yeah, I think I've understood. Still got a bit confusing now, to be honest.
So if you've withdrawn it, Councillor Rodriguez, we then move to a brand new proposal, which will need to be proposed by, I assume, Councillor and seconded, that the committee acknowledges as an ecological issue, and requests that the executive undertake those 7 points with the additional one of the timeliness. That's my understanding, Chairman.
Okay, would somebody like to propose that?
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Clayton, thank you. Would anybody like to second that? Councillor Rodriguez, thank you. Members, happy to take a vote on that, please. Anybody against? Councillor Gibson's against. Okay.
Can I just point of order? I don't know. Question, because I'm a bit confused. Just to make sure that that wording that Steve that you read out says about being an ecological issue, that we're not declaring an ecological emergency. Is that correct? Just to clarify, because it's in a document that we would consider that based on the evidence.
I mean, you can have whatever wording you choose, Chairman. I think, and Councillor, it's probably the committee acknowledges as ecological. We're not declaring it necessarily, but acknowledging it and asking on that basis that the executive take the following action.
I think, Chair, if I may come back, I don't think I would second the proposal for an ecological emergency, because that wasn't the original words that I understood for this second proposal, because we haven't declared an ecological emergency. That's to come based on the evidence as written out in the 4 points or 5 points that we're proposing. So I'm happy to second, if we're seconding what is written on paper in that amended version in those points as it is, with the addition, as you've said, Chair, to come back to us as soon as physically possible.
Sorry, but the wording as it stands would require it to go to full council.
To executive to make the decision.
Yeah,
those 7 bullet points plus the addition with the timeliness, Chairman.
Okay, and I'm just, because the wording itself says that the council resolves to.
Yeah, and if you'll not forget, that's because originally it was the declaration that was going to potentially go straight to full council, but as we've discussed, this is about community scrutiny recommending to executive to consider that.
Right. Okay.
So yes, the wording in, that's why I brought up the point earlier about the actual context of that document now has changed slightly.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Godwin-Pearson.
Thank you. So just so I'm clear, are we recognising, as a committee, are we recognising that we have a biodiversity crisis in Sedgemoor, and that we are that we want to get actual local figures as quickly as possible so that we can declare, and we can make a point, we can make some points for sort of actual targets and action plan that is local and specific to us. Is that right?
That's how I see it. Yeah.
So, Chair, may I ask a question on that? Sorry, Councillor Godwin-Pearson. It may be the word. Sorry, that's my door slamming. It may be the wording in the document I'm getting confused about, because before we say that we do have an ecological crisis or an ecological situation or emergency, we can't resolve that, because in those 7 points, it's saying that there'll be a report back to members with a view to declaring the emergency. So we can't declare that now without the evidence coming forward, right?
That's Councillor Gibson. I think what I'm missing here is I'm getting various things from members, and I'm not really sure what the proposal is. I think I need a member to come forward with a clear proposal as to what they want. Councillor Gibson.
You could call it, we might have an ecological emergency, but the councillors are going to sit on it a bit longer, discuss it a bit more just in case, and then we might do some actions. Well, actions are taking place already, and we need to say there is an ecological emergency, because there's enough evidence out there. You've only got to look outside, and without looking at the scientists, I just don't get how you want to just bang it back. This is just like bat and ball. It's just all over the place. We need to vote on it, vote it through now.
Sorry, Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to make a proposal, just to clear my head, that the 7 amended recommendations, or the 7 amended bullet points, that we recommend that to executive, with the addition on point 2 about it coming back to members as quickly as physically possible, or something along that line. That's what I'd like to propose.
I'm happy to second that and withdraw my proposal.
Okay, thank you. Would members like to vote on that? Okay.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
Can I just say something? I must agree with Councillor Gibson. It seems silly that we're sitting here batting this backwards and forwards, where it's always been nationally declared there's a ecological emergency, and we're just batting it backwards and forwards. It's going to take more months. It's going to come back again, then it's going to go back again, and then we'll find something else not to do. It'll go back again. It'll be batting this backwards and forwards forever. It's about time we just took the plunge and said, right, we'll do this. It's a living document. If you want to change it later, do it. But let's do this. Let's declare it. It's been nationally recognised there is one. So why should Sedgemoor be different to anywhere else in the country? I'm sorry. It's about time we just took the plunge and went for it.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Pete, did you want to add? Your hand's up.
Yeah, if I could provide a little bit of context, I think no one's doubting that on a national basis, there is ample evidence to say that there is an ecological emergency and international evidence as well. What we are lacking is local evidence of particular issues that we would like to prioritise within an ecological emergency action plan. However, I think the fact that we don't have that localised information currently shouldn't stop us saying that there is an emergency currently, both internationally, nationally, and presumably therefore also locally, but we do need that localized information to develop an action plan. But I don't think we need the action plan to actually declare the ecological emergency. I think the action plan would be developed after we've said that yes, there is an emergency.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Councillor Gibson, your hand's up.
Yeah, just that one bit of information about the phosphates and the water courses and the reams and the water, just from that point of view, water is life. It gives us life. And just that one point on its own, and it doesn't stand on its own because it affects everything else, that just one point on its own, we should be saying there's an emergency. That one issue, which is linked, it's totally linked to everything else. It will be totally linked, is water. It's the source of life and it's running all the way through Somerset. And just that point, and the point of view of sea level rise and what we've got there, I mean, that's happening and we're very vulnerable in this area. Just those 2 points on their own, it's just one point because it's water. There should be enough to say we have an ecological emergency and there's enough evidence out there just for that one thing. Never mind looking how many insects there aren't in the skies and etc. etc.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Steve, can I ask technical point? We have Councillor Rodriguez's proposal and Councillor Clayton second that.
Yes.
Is it possible to also have a different proposal and somebody second that and then take a vote on the two?
It is possible. What would normally happen is Councillor Rodriguez's proposal was the first one, in which case that would be voted on initially. If that was passed, that's passed. If it falls, you then can consider voting on the second motion.
Right, okay. And
Councillor Clayton wishes to speak, I think, Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor Clayton.
I may have got confused at the time, but I thought we'd voted earlier that we weren't going to do that, and we've voted that we were going to basically look for the information first.
I think it got confused in terms of what the proposal actually was.
I thought that vote was accepted some time ago, that we weren't going to declare that today. Steve, can you help us out on that one?
I think that vote didn't get fully carried through. There was further questions before or further debate before we got there, I'm afraid, Councillor Clayton. So later on, when it was Councillor Rodriguez's proposal, which I believe you seconded, it all went a bit pear-shaped, shall we say, when we got to the vote.
I apologise. So in that case, can I also clarify, can I vote?
You're able to vote.
Right, okay. So we have Councillor Rodriguez's proposal to put those recommendations to executive of the 7 points plus the addition of the timely manner, which was seconded by Councillor Clayton. So I'll open that up to votes now, please, from members. Steve, I can't see everybody. Is that
Councillor Clayton, Councillor Rodriguez, Councillor Godwin Pearson, and Councillor Betty.
So that's 4 to 3. Oh, sorry, those against?
Councillor Crowe, Gibson, and yourself.
So that's 4 to 3, yeah?
That's right, Chairman, yes.
So
Approved.
that's approved then, okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I apologise to members for the confusion. I'm still learning. It's a little bit confusing for me in terms of how things work. Bear with me, muddling through it, but hoping to get some bit more clarity as we go forward. I'm sorry. Okay, so does that conclude for that item? Anything else to add? No, okay. So if we move on to agenda item 9, it's the scrutiny work programme. Which Rose, did you want to add something into that?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. So anyone who doesn't know, I'm Rose Stokes, Scrutiny Officer. I've just come back from maternity leave today, and I've attached the dates for the upcoming scrutiny meetings. So the next one is the 22nd November, where it sounds as though obviously we're bringing back some of those points from the balloon and sky lantern policy. But it's also just sort of an opportunity if there's any topics that people are thinking of that they'd like to see on the agenda for the future meetings, to sort of bring them up now or to email me at some point, because we'll be hopefully looking to put together some items to go on the future agendas. I think obviously there's been a bit of a hiatus since the last meeting in March, but I think previously mentioned was looking at shopping experiences in town centres across the district. So yeah, if there's any sort of topics that people think of where scrutiny might be able to have an impact, then if you wanted to send me an email or to bring them up now, then we can have a look at what will be on the future work programme.
Thank you, Rose, and welcome back. It's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you.
Would members like to add anything now that they'd like to see included in the work programme? Committee members?
If I may just say, I did ask personally for what was the council's strategic policy on development. I said particularly on Bridgewater town centre, but it got widened to the district. But that was done a long time ago, and nothing's happened with it. It's just sat there. So, and I'm just wondering, would appear we have no strategy at all. How are you going to develop the town centres in Sedgemoor? So that was my question, and it's been ignored, really, if I may say so, because it was on the agenda for work programme. It might have been, last year, and nothing's happened. It was put off a meeting, and then now it's not on there, or appears to be not on there at all. So I'm absolutely disgusted that this matter has not been raised, it hasn't been addressed, and it's just sat there, just forgotten about. And so it's just kick the can down the road and everybody will forget about it. Well, I haven't forgotten about it, and I should go on about it until we get the policy. I want to know what the strategic policy is for the council for the development of town centre sites, which I don't think, to be quite frank with you, they have.
It is something that's on the list. I mean, whether it's something that is obviously there haven't been any meetings since March, and there was the period last year where, again, there weren't any meetings between March and September. But I think just because it was the first day that I was coming back, that's why there isn't like a detailed work programme, but it is something that I have written down from watching back the previous meetings in February and March. So it is something that we'll definitely be looking into. It was just whether there's any other ideas of things going forward that members would like on the work programme as well.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. It's definitely on the programme, Councillor Crowe, and it's not being ignored purposely. I think it's just a question of meetings not being held and things being postponed.
No, well, it was postponed from an earlier meeting. Again, it was postponed from the meeting, and just they said, oh, we have to put it to the next meeting. Well, because of the next meeting, nothing happened.
Okay, so that remains on the programme.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. It's not your fault, by the way.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was only, I think I recall the last meeting, it was some months ago now. I don't know if it was Janet, I might have been wrong, but didn't she mention about animal welfare or dogs? We only have like one dog officer or animal officer, and about looking into that policy and how we can potentially, if there's scope to expand or whatever else. Was that not something that we could look at?
Yeah, yes, I think so. From the March meeting, that was something else that was raised. I think it was, yeah, whether it should be expanded to a animal welfare officer as well, rather than just a dog warden. But on looking briefly, it looks as though that is what the job description is, that they do cover both of those aspects. It's not just a dog warden. But yes, that is something that we could look into bringing at a future date as well.
Okay, thank you. I think I have a couple of things that I would like to include on the programme if possible. One is a review of the council's community assets in light of unitary and local government reorganisation. I think we, as a committee, should look at the community assets that are held by Sedgemoor and see if the current audit is up to date and we know exactly what the assets are. So I'd like to see a report brought back to the committee for that and how members feel about that. Okay.
Yes, I'll note that down.
Okay, and that might also include any service agreements that are already in existence with towns and parishes that may need to be looked at and see how the unitary will affect the community assets and service agreements in existence for towns and parishes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know, there's already quite a list there, I suppose, but obviously also the COVID wardens to look and see what they've been doing and how effective their work was in terms of looking at or working with the nighttime economy, holiday parks, etc., where we've had a peak in COVID cases and the wardens' work in general. Okay, anything else that anybody would like to see in the programme? No? Okay. I think that concludes the meeting for today. I apologise for the long meeting. And thank you very much, everyone, for your input. Thank you very much.